here we are again with this. We had just did Megaforce. Now we're gonna go into Super Megaforce. Hashtag Powered Force. Hashtag the thing that almost killed me in my fandom for and love for Power Rangers. Let's not waste any time. Let's get on to it.
Hello Internet, I'm the Disney Brain, here to continue our discussion on the most divisive season of Power Rangers. But before we fully dive into Super Megaforce, there's another often memed aspect of these seasons that intrigues me. So, near the end of Megaforce, Vrock kind of blows up and gets turned into a machine. And on the surface, we understand very clearly what this is meant to tell us. Vrock has always been adamant about the inherent betterness and complexity of machines. His most famous line pompously refers to them as far too complex for you to understand. And while we understandably make fun of him for that line, Megaforce's framing of Vrock here, in addition to their framing of robotic life in general, almost supports his claim. Robo Knight ends up developing beyond his programming, even going out of his way to learn things about humans that don't necessarily assist in his mission. Rico was intended to take advantage of human emotions, but he ends up feeling them instead. And even Vrock, as a machine, isn't so straightforward. Notice that he actually saves Metal Alice during a time where his AI is more prevalent and his memories are more scattered. It's only when he returns mentally to the Vrock of old that he willingly and discompassionately sacrifices her. The implications are pretty clear here, because it's the same implications that are pretty main text for our heroes. The implication being that the way robots operate and were utilized here obviously was not far too complex for you to understand. That having been said, there did very much exist a level of complexity that the villains couldn't account for. So, it may very well have been far too complex for them to understand. So with all that said, let's talk about one of the best episodes of Super Megaforce, which is also called Super Megaforce. Between the season premiere and Earth Fights Back, there's a lot going on here in the opening stages. We've discussed the arbitrary seasonal splits forced upon the Neo-Saban era before, but this season really does it best for a number of reasons. The biggest to me is the most obvious one. By evoking the olden times Ranger standby of throwing other Sentai powers into the current season, there's a fairly clean split you can turn to. So through the Messenger, a figure that harks back to Turbo's original tease of Countdown, you basically tribute 5 different seasons all in one go, which is something Super Megaforce does sometimes, but not quite all the time, and not always particularly well. But what I love the most about the first 2 episodes is that continued, unrelenting commitment to the principles of Megaforce. Principles that I think place the season in a far more positive light than it often gets credit for. Because, again, while none of it feels particularly well written or even natural, a byproduct of the countless times Sakurai firmly refused a potentially better idea, it never feels like it's cheating us, like it's lying to us. As such, we get a beautifully put together sequence where the Rangers are saving those in need while the Earth tries to rebuild from the Armada attack, which, while by no means a direct tribute to Lightspeed Rescue, might as well be their Lightspeed Rescue tribute, in spite of it actually being an SBD tribute.
I wouldn't say all that. I would not say all that. No. Just because they had shown a little few clips of them saving certain people does not mean that it was contributing anything between Lightspeed Rescue or SPD. There's no way that I can make that comparison. Not even in a logical sense. I can't make that comparison. Nah, I can't. I'm sorry, I can't do that. I cannot.
Which I guess sort of works too, if you squint. But my point
is I can't squint, man.
The Lightspeed Rescue's priorities would have been after an attack this devastating. No, it's not quite as intentional or perhaps as fun as having Carter actually interact with the team, but it's not nothing. And generally speaking, watching this season again without the nagging anticipation of who's going to show up and when, things like that become a lot more evident. The methods Super Megaforce uses to attribute the legacy of power are wildly inconsistent, but they're also not exclusively a byproduct of Gokaiger footage either. The idea of an entire community banding together to deny the Armada an easy win and rebuild their city, that's Power Rangers.
They didn't really do anything, though. That's not really Power Rangers, because when you compare it to Countdown to Destruction from Power Rangers in Space, they did more. They actually fought back. The only thing that they showed was them repairing a school. That's it. They didn't face the Armada themselves. All they did was run, while the Rangers did all the work. So yeah, I cannot agree with that either.
Through and through. To say nothing of giving Mr. Burley his time in the sun to once again praise the human spirit as a nod all the way back to episode 1. As underutilized as he might be, I love the idea of an everyday educator helping provide stability during moments of crisis, especially as a send-up to Miss Appleby, who provided a heavily underrated presence to early PR. But putting aside my obvious educator bias, let's now talk more about the anniversary elements of this anniversary season. Similar to Megaforce, there's a lot of power-ups that get...
Oh, and about this, it pains my heart still to know the fact that we could have had Billy instead of this man. It pains my heart to know that they thought that we wouldn't have been interested in having an old ranger, a veteran ranger who we haven't seen in a long time on TV, to be put in this scenario. I probably will never get over that.
Educator helping provides, although it's arguably more dubious here because, for example, the team earns Ninja Storm powers off the back of doing nothing really Ninja Storm related. Weirder still is the amazing and absolutely bonkers episode that is United as One. It directly harks back to the fake wedding used in Samurai just 2 years prior, but it's also a Dino Thunder tribute? Similar to the SBD tribute, it doesn't make much direct sense, but the idea of an Emma-centered episode that tries to bring happiness back to people's lives inside the bookends of Armada attacks just feels right. It does more for Emma and Orion than it does for Dino Thunder and the myriad of ways they could have incorporated that unofficial Ranger anniversary. But I don't mind that so much in this case and cases like it, because one of the biggest critiques against the direction Super Megaforce takes is how the suit porn overshadows the characters, and that largely rings true. But in episodes like this, you get a beautifully campy ride while still showcasing Emma's inbuilt desire to see the world smile. While even some of the most memorable anniversary elements feel like they're missing something, there are still a couple highlights in there. I like the idea that Wild Force's Red Lion is joining forces with a team very much similar to its old one, though, of course, it would have been nice to see an often overlooked team back again in some capacity.
Yeah. I'm telling you, looking back at this, it just really pains my heart. It just really, it's just repeatedly putting a sharp pain back in my heart. I'm so happy Hasbro bought Power Rangers. I don't know what to do.
I also kind of like the incidental idea that the Racer Zord represents, since in Sentai he's a literal next-generation Zord of the Go-Andrew mechs. So Megaforce, and presumably Gokaiger before them, haven't watched it all yet, having that exact type of Zord very clearly feeds into the idea of legacy. And there are a few better ways to win me over than to throw Casey Rhodes into the mix. It's a fairly odd episode, but not in a way I minded. And plus, we got a scene of Jake and Emma praising Gia to the high heavens while blissfully unaware they're competing for her affection. That's just funny to me because of how obvious both individuals make it. So pretty fortunate that Jason Smith was a constant presence in the writer's room this go-round. So then, of course, he goes on to pen one of my other favorite episodes this season in Blue Saber Saga. I love Samurai Surprise because, honestly, how could you not? But it got me thinking how much better a fit this plot point was.
I didn't like it.
Blue Saber Saga, just 2 episodes.
It didn't make any sense to me because, again, you have to consider, you have to look at the situation. Jaden had his powers. No matter how no matter how you look at this, he had his powers. It was not taken from him. And why he just suddenly appeared and did nothing except hand him a power up didn't make any sense. You have your powers. Same thing with the Jungle Fury Red Ranger. Y'all have y'all powers. Instead of trying to be all secretive and give them hints, why not join them like any other Ranger has did in previous seasons? I don't understand that.
Prior. Granted, Noah earning the Mystic Force powers after his katana battle makes some sense, if only because the monster is voiced by Nick Sampson, so it's another one of those cheeky shoutouts that, ironically, plays more into Nick's solid amount of work as a PR voice actor as opposed to a Ranger. But since Katana is to Noah what Decker was to Jaden without 20 episodes of build-up, you can see that really working as a neat parallel. I'm a big fan of Blue Saber Saga regardless, however, because I think it works specifically because it shouldn't. I have always seen it as a companion piece to Going Viral, Noah's other big focus episode, and that's because in the aftermath of absolving himself of his issues with his hero image, he now feels the wrong-headed need to live up to that same image. He doesn't need to do this. He doesn't need to fight alone, and quite frankly, Noah is smart enough to know better. But his reaction to being called to the carpet, while not a smart reaction, feels like a very human reaction. It's not crazy to think someone like Noah is capable of feeling overly prideful, in spite of usually being pragmatic, especially since he used to think he shouldn't even be here, specifically because of his usual personality. And he's not rewarded for that pride either. It's only after the most hilariously stupid-looking power-up that isn't owned by Orion comes into play that he's able to win the day. When it's all said and done, Noah was allowed to be wrong, to be flawed, but that's okay, because his team still had his back and respected his wishes. And that's why I think it's not just a nice character moment for him, but an episode that continues to speak to Megaforce's take-home points. Again, for as preachy as this show is, and it is far too preachy, there is rarely much divergence between what it believes and what it shows. What's more, in spite of Noah having very little in common with the swordsman who once wore his suit, Super Megaforce really...
God, I love Joe. And that's the thing that I did not say when Linkar had talked about this. I love Joe. Joe was that dude. I'm telling you, Joe was that guy. Where is it at? Where is it? Yeah. Joe was that dude. And I'm not saying this because I have the same name as him, but he reminds me of Zoro so much. He's so focused on swordsmanship. He's very quiet. He doesn't really say much. He's focused, and he's Marvelous's second man. His best mate, along with the crew. Like, come on now. This is literally Roanoke Zoro in Ranger form. Like, I love Joe. Joe is the man.
Super Megaforce really does commit to that identity for him going forward. Unlike the animal spirits idea that quickly fizzles out for Emma and Jake, Noah's swordsmanship is more directly tied to his counterpart in Joe, so they had all those action shots readily available to them. And since he went through the Blue Saber saga, there is no real denying that he really is the team's sword guy now, even if only on a relative scale. And after a few moments sprinkled throughout making use of Joe's footage, it all caps off with his signature battle moment where he just kicks Argus's ass. It was one of the most satisfying Megaforce moments, and guess who wrote it? Jason Smith once again. So yeah, kudos to one of my favorite Rangers ever for transitioning to a writer role and then bringing the best out of another one of my favorite Rangers ever. So now let's finally talk about Orion, but for real this time. The main thing with him is I wish he was a bit quirkier. I dug his risky business tribute even for out of nowhere as it was, and I think leaning into that a bit more would have melded better with the clearly contrasting battle persona he inherited from Guy. and there's not the same commitment to it that you'd find with Noah, as we discussed. Orion is pretty fine overall, but other than a cute rock quarry gag, there's not much defining him as Andresian.
Well, the only way for them to even do that is to completely copy Guy. Guy was a nerd who knew everything about the Super Sentai. And when he found Marvelous and the others, he went full geek mode. And he stayed that way until he had gained the team's respect. Well, actually, even after he had gained the team respect, because he loved watching other Sentai teams. He knew all about the certain teams that need to be together, the certain Sentai that needed to be with that other Sentai. Because if it was left up to Marvelous, he would have just used any old kind of Ranger key with all the other Ranger keys and just say, "Oh yeah, we're together." Like, that's the reason why that works for guys, because Guy was a Super Sentai fan, a super fan actually, right, to the point where he wanted to be a part of the Sentai. Now, Orion's case, I don't think he needs to do that. I think he just needs to stay the way he is, because he's the only one, in my opinion, that's had any kind of attention to detail, and that actually makes sense as to how he found his Ranger key and why he has it, compared to all the others where they've just been handed to him for a bunch of Ranger keys that's mounted on a freaking on the freaking walls, and they're just there. Like, come on.
And I can't say for sure what the original plans for him were, like I can with Troy, but I think he would have benefited from that. Especially since this team specifically would have been very embracing of whatever idiosyncrasies he'd bring from a galaxy away. So him feeling more like that odd man out could have easily served as the other side of the Robo Knight coin, since his inherent difference, while again never a point of contention, necessitated adjustments from the team. But I think the smartest thing they did was have him connect to Emma pretty quickly, since that's just the role Emma plays. Outside of Robo Knight, who is much more in Troy's wheelhouse, she tends to always be the one reaching out, and it made for a fun dynamic. But one of my favorite uses of Orion comes from him not being there, which isn't meant to be a slight so much as it's meant to highlight some of the creative ways the staff melded together Goseiger and Gokaiger footage, which brings us to Robo Knight, Troy, and the return of the many-faced rock. Megaforce placed a ton of stock into the relationship between the scared-to-be vulnerable Troy and the seemingly never vulnerable Robo Knight. So much so that Troy spent the better part of the initial invasion's aftermath searching for him. Some might argue that Troy's fear of losing Robo Knight should have been a continuous point of emphasis for him. But because of who Troy is, you never really had to do that, because we already know that in his mind, tears are for people like Emma. Odd as that exchange is, it's a very Troy thing to say. So we can very easily assume that he's both suppressing what he actually feels about not having Robo Knight around, but also, his visions have always told him that he'd be there in the end. And we know he places his faith in that because he knows the battle is never truly decided until the very, very end. But knowing all of this still doesn't change how deflating and devastating it is to see Robo Knight as a rock puppet. Overall, the Rock is Back two-parter is a really unique use of leftover Goseiger footage. It managed to cobble together the final 6-episode stretch of that Sentai to form a somewhat incoherent but enjoyable raising the stakes plotline before Mavro appears. And of course, at the heart of all of that is Robo Knight forcibly defecting to the side of evil. And this harks back to what I mentioned previously, regarding Robo Knight being the one consistent source of emotional openness from Troy. The main thrust of their connection is Troy seeing Robo Knight as an unshakable ideal to strive for. So seeing those ideals compromised hurts him more than anything. Because if even someone like Robo Knight can be compromised, in spite of his relative lack of vulnerability, then there are certainly no assurances for Troy, in spite of his guarded nature. Robo Knight forgetting his mission isn't just your run-of-the-mill control the good guy plot, at least not to Troy. If Robo Knight ends up failing, it would mean upending the very foundation of Troy's most fervent beliefs. Troy can be a dry-faced, cool-as-ice leader most days, but not about that. That's why he's fighting against Robo Knight like a man possessed, because on the one hand, the original plan was, in fact, to have Troy be a conduit for morphing-grade energy, and on the other hand, it's a touch easier to be this level of feral when your sense of self is taking a bigger beating than your ribcage. Though I would criticize how it all ends, because Troy being perfectly alright and content after Robo Knight dies doesn't quite work to me. Not because he wouldn't continue to push his feelings deep down, but more because he never really questions what his visions could mean now that Robo Knight, at least at the time, can't be a part of them anymore. What's more, they got him working again in the end, but his mortality still proved just as vulnerable as his mentality. And on a hero team that treats robots as just mechanical people, that's something that would definitely weigh on their collective minds a lot more. All in all, this pair of episodes works decently well as a Sentai finale force-fit into more of a penultimate story arc, but I think it works better as an almost close to Troy's emotional arc, one that was always present because of his stoic nature, not in spite of it. Even the often memed "don't drop your weapons" moment is a part of that. It's not really about the weapons. Obviously they can fight fine without them. In fact, that's what Casey's episode was partly about. It's more about the idea that the Power Rangers should never place themselves in a compromising position, and for reasons we've discussed in too much depth, that very clearly would rub Troy the wrong way. It's really the only other thing he gets openly emotional about.
So you're saying is that Troy is incapable of being vulnerable. He doesn't want to be vulnerable. So when he said that, it was just as a defense mechanism or an automatic response because he doesn't like he doesn't want to seem as though he's weak. And it's a stretch, but I can see what you're saying.
But even that seemingly innocuous detail has a part to play when Troy can finally let go. Literally. Because only when the legendary battle finally reaches its end can that emotional arc truly close. And what better way to symbolize that than for Troy to, in essence, drop his weapon into the sand and leave it behind. For the first time since he hopped off that bus, he's free. For the first time since he embraced the destiny of seemingly endless fighting, he can stop. He can relax. He can just be. All things considered, that's a pretty neat way to go out. Certainly not as flashy or as powerful as blowing yourself up, or saving the soul of a student victimized by his inner demons, but still, neat. The Megaforce cast didn't have any big, obvious character arcs to latch onto, nor did they grow in ways other eras prioritized a bit more. But I think there's still a fair bit of intrigue there, in part because James Bates and the writers were so impossibly limited in what Sakurai would allow them to do. In a situation like that, similar to some of the better aspects of Samurai, they were forced to be a lot more creative and work within the margins just to make something cohesive, let alone decent. And, you know, the cohesive part is debatable, but that having been said, both seasons have plenty of decent moments, and a couple really good ones. Super Megaforce still stands as probably my least favorite season of Rangers overall, but I don't think those ideas are mutually exclusive, because within those aforementioned margins is an honest little show about some very flawed people trying to save the world. One of my favorite moments on that end is when Orion is leaving, before immediately coming back. He says his piece to everyone, but it's Jake that really stands out to me here. And out of his mouth comes the most forced, most somber admittance that everyone loves him. I sat there and thought about the delivery of this scene for many minutes. A scene where Jake just barely, if at all, believes in his own bluster. A bluster we understand to be a facade anyway, because at times, Jake comes off as just as afraid of his own truth as Troy does. I don't know how that scene was intended to come off, but incidentally or otherwise, I just find that moment so telling and so fascinating. Before we dig into the season's final moments, let's discuss Gosei. Gosei as a mentee of Zordon makes no sense. We understand.
Thank you.
But since Zordon was never the most straightforward mentor, Gosei's mentality kind of fits, even if the logic of his presence doesn't. He consistently fails to tell his team important details before they happen, just like Zordon. He merely...
No. See, no. Zordon did better than what Gosei was doing. Gosei is a watered down version of what Zordon was. Zordon actually cared about the betterment and the future about his Rangers. Each and every time, and it wasn't even for anything with the regarding Rita at times. At times it was stuff regarding their teenage lives, and Zordon was there. So you can't say that it was that he was just like how Gosei was. No, you can't say that at all. Zordon was better than that. Kimberly said it herself. Ever since he came into their lives, he was like a father to them. So, nah.
Throws random upgrades out there for all of them to enjoy, seemingly just because. And that was the entire impetus for the Turbo movie, so that's not without precedent either.
No. See, Zordon gave them stuff when it was needed. Now, the whole deal with them being the Turbo, that part is not explained. But for the rest of everything else, whenever they were in a pinch, Zordon gave them new weapons. Whenever their Zords got destroyed, Zordon gave them new Zords. When the Green Ranger kept losing his strength, Zordon refilled his power. So you can't say that because of that one instance compared to Gosei giving them a new power-up every single time. Nah. Can't agree with that.
But then he has these moments where he's outright panicking and screaming at Rangers to morph. So he really does embody a younger Zordon, right down to trying to emulate him, minus that signature calmness at points. Neither really knows what they're doing a lot of the time, but they're really good at convincing teenagers of the opposite. So again, it's one of those aspects of the show that does embrace where it came from, but it's more obvious about the flaws inherent to the idea, which get called out by people like Gia.
Yeah, so, but I can't say, you can't say that he was a younger version of Zordon, no. We don't even know what a younger version of Zordon is. So I don't even know where you come up with that. Where do you come up with that at? We don't even know what a younger version of Zordon is. Zordon was a being that got caught in a time loop and got put in the presence that he was right there. Abrupting with knowledge and freaking wisdom. And it's not like he didn't know what he was doing. He knew what he was doing. And had a better assistant to help him in those affairs. If he didn't know what he was doing, the Rangers would have been dead. They would have lost their powers initially. The Green Ranger, Tommy would have never came back if he didn't know what he was doing. He gave Tommy a whole new Ranger form. A whole new power coin. If he didn't know what he was doing, he wouldn't have known about the Nenjeti coins. Come on now. Come on.
Gosei ends up looking like a wonky mentor for arguably more dubious reasons than Zordon, which might have been the whole point. He's not just another Zordon, he's intended to be a lesser Zordon, a TK without thousands of years of battle experience across the cosmos. So even his at times extremely flimsy justification for almost everything he's questioned about feels oddly sensible. And Tensu, well, he got this cute episode where he got lost and the others had to find him. And with that, let's conclude our Super Megaforce discussion with the legendary battle. I've always been rather fond of this episode because it really works on several levels. Firstly,
it works in your opinion?
Is parts of Countdown that we didn't or shouldn't have gotten. Instead of being forced to wonder where all the other Rangers ran off to during the promised day, they all come back to face the next great world-ending event. Instead of the death of Ecliptor and the salvation of almost everyone else, which serves as a slap to the face of InSpace's strongest points, the once-controlled Robo-Knight gets to fight one last time and fulfill his mission. Now, few things will ever beat the I'm a Ranger 2 moment. It's one of only a handful of picture-perfect PR moments, so Megaforce was never going to come close to that, try as it might. However, I still really appreciate having that type of moment, that type of focus here, especially in a season like this one, that will never ever shut up about the potential of humanity and the spirit thereof. As I've said too many times now, it's not subtle about it, but it's never lying to you about it, which counts for more to me. I would love the fact that the legends show up and save people first regardless, but I like it that much more with how fitting those cameo intros are to the core of this season. A season that starts off by having our beaten, battered, and bruised team of Rangers ensure the safety of the civilians. So this specific team, dealing with a broken people before instilling hope in them, feels very authentic. It feels like the moment they were always built for. And that's pretty great, actually. It's a season that evokes a lot of InSpace, a lot of Lightspeed Rescue, a lot of Wild Force, and of course, a lot of MMPR. But it still comes away feeling largely inspired by those things, and not always overwhelmed by them. At least when they're not blinding us with every suit in the book. And some not in the book. There is a lot of places where the anniversary aspects fall way short, but also, there are areas it digs into that actually convey the legacy of power in some really engaging ways. It's not always great, or even good for that matter, but I could never honestly bring myself to dislike it. It's just way too weird and interesting, and most of all, sincere. Not to say that there's not plenty to dislike here, obviously, but for me, rewatching it made it clear that there's so much more to Super Megaforce than being bootleg Gokaiger. And maybe alongside all the negative commentary, more folks will start to see that side of things too. So I hope you all found this video enlightening, even if you didn't necessarily agree with it. That's really as much as I can ask for. Next on the docket will...
Well, thank you, Disney Brain. I appreciate that. Although I don't agree with a lot of the points that you made, I understand where you're coming from. And no, I'm not going to shame anybody for liking Megaforce or by God's grace, loving Super Megaforce. But to each their own. I'll say that. To each their own. In my opinion, there's no way that final thing was in any comparison to Countdown to Destruction or any of the Power Ranger seasons, especially not NPR. This was like I said, a castor oiled down version of what that was. And no, I'm not saying this to be capping or like because of nostalgia. I'm saying it's because I watched that whole seasons. And when it got serious, it got serious. When it honed down some points, it honed down on some points. Yes, at some points it didn't make sense, but it's better than this. I'll say that. Post your comments down below what y'all thought about this one. Like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what y'all think about this. As such, this has been Master Real Sakurai. Let me know if y'all want me to do any more of these. I'll see y'all again. Peace.
We keep dreaming of a world where all is good.